the details. After being cheated on, we become insatiable in our consumption of them, and we become relentless in our fixation and obsession over them. We give them so much power. We think that if we only knew what happened, if we only understood every little detail, then we could rest. Now, for those of you that are in a similar position that I was in, where you don't have many details, it's so easy to believe that you need them. And we give details so much power. We believe that if we only understood, if we only had all of that information, that then we would feel better than how we currently do, because we want anything. We're looking for any lifeline that will help. It's as though we think that knowing those things can somehow fill the hole in our hearts. That's not how it works. First of all, regardless of if you have the information or you're simply imagining or wondering about the information, it's going to take up as much mental space as you allow it. Just knowing doesn't let your mind rest. And once you know, well, you can never unknow. So the way to feel better is not to get more information. The way to feel better is to stop allowing that information, either real or imagined, to take up so much space in your mind. Now, before we talk about how you can stop obsessing over the details, we first need to talk about an important distinction. If you are staying with the person that cheated on you, you not only deserve transparency, you need transparency in order to heal and in order to rebuild trust. But transparency is not the same as a blow-by-blow of everything that happened. It's important for you to recognize what information do you really need. And don't rush into this. In the beginning, you're not thinking straight. And in the beginning, you're going to demand more information than maybe you want to know. Because again, once you have that, it's in there. You can never, ever unknow it. And so it's best to wait just a little bit. Wait until your mind is a little bit calmer. Wait until you're a little bit more rational and think about what information do you really need to know in order to heal, in order to find some acceptance, and in order to work to rebuild the relationship. Also, before you start asking for information, ask yourself, when will it be enough? Because that's the thing with these details is we keep thinking that maybe the next one is going to make us feel better. Oh, no, that one didn't. Okay, it's the next one after that. And so it can keep on going. This endless cycle of feeling bad, getting more information, not helping, and then feeling bad again. Also ask yourself if you can believe the information that they're giving you. Sometimes they may be lying in order to protect themselves, or sometimes even in a misguided effort to try to protect you. So think about what that means in terms of how you handle the information. You know, maybe they tell you that every time they were with the affair partner, they used protection. But that doesn't mean that you still shouldn't get yourself tested. So is that really information that you need to have? Is that really a detail that's going to help you? Some of the worst cheaters might even be using the details in an attempt to punish you or control you. And if that is the case, then your best course of action is to not have contact, because you will never find peace when they are doing that to you. At the same time, make sure that you're not being your own worst enemy and using those details to punish yourself. I know for me, I was so ashamed and so embarrassed that I didn't know what was happening. And so many of the details that I was fixated on were all of those times that, well, when I should have been able to see what was happening and I didn't. And so I was using those details to punish myself. I was using those details to tell myself that I was stupid and blind and too trusting and all of those things. But none of that was helpful. What eventually was helpful is recognizing, hey, I loved this man. I trusted this man. Those are not character flaws. And once I forgave myself, those details no longer mattered. When it comes to the details, it's so often like poking a bruise. It doesn't feel good to think about them. It doesn't feel good to ruminate over what you do know or to obsess over what you don't and start wondering and filling in the gaps. But even though it doesn't feel good, we still do it. And I really believe part of the reason we do it is to remind ourselves, oh yeah, I was wounded. I was hurt, and to vindicate those feelings, because as we have those details so often, well, it justifies how we feel. And part of letting go of that is recognizing the limitations of all of that information, of paying attention to how you feel when you are thinking about the details. Does it make you feel better? Or is it only serving to make you feel worse? Does it help you understand anything more? Or does it only make you question why? It's also important to recognize that you can't outmuscle these details. Your brain is going to go there. If you don't have the information, well, it's that void, that empty space that our minds abhor, and it's going to create stories to fill those in. If you do know the details, what happens then is your mind starts creating this movie that plays and plays and plays, and all you want is to push stop. And you can't force your way through that. In fact, the harder you try to push it away, the more you try to deny it, the more those details just dig in their heels. The only way to let these obsessive thoughts fade is by not trying to fight them. Accept that you're feeling that way. Recognize, hey, right now I am focusing on what happened on that day. See that. Acknowledge that. And then it's okay to move on from that point. It's when I've recommended it so many times before, but it's fitting here as well. Journaling is a wonderful tool to help get all of those obsessive thoughts out of your head. Because if you don't release them somehow, well, they only seem to multiply, don't they? So just by getting them out on the page, just by releasing them, it helps to let go of them. And while you're doing that, you can even change how you write about it. Make it as boring, as factual and non-emotional as you possibly can. When you're writing down what happened, think about writing it like one of those books that goes on and on and on, 10, 15 pages describing the protagonist's living room before they finally get on with the action. If you start to write it out like that, you're going to recognize, oh, this is really kind of dumb that I'm paying that much attention to all of this stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. Be careful with social media. It can kind of give you that seed, that starting point for obsessing about something. If you happen to see a post by your ex and they're with the affair partner, then your brain is going to start to wonder, well, where were they? What were they doing? Who else was there? How were they feeling? What did they do when they got home? And so on and so forth. And the way to keep that from happening is to not see the post in the first place. Be aware of when your obsessive thoughts are the worst, and then do what you can to change your environment during that time. For me, my worst was in the evenings after work. And so during the first year, I spent hours and hours at the gym. Not that I was working out that entire time, but just because if I changed my physical environment and if I kept myself busy and engaged, I recognized that my mind wouldn't go down those pathways that I didn't want to travel. And speaking of environments, when you find yourself really obsessing, get up and move, ideally outside. When you start to move forward, your brain is going to start to move forward as well. And one of my favorite kinds of walks to do is what I call a mindfulness walk. So just pick something that you're going to focus on. Maybe it's the color red. And then go for a walk around the neighborhood or around the block or through the woods and just focus on everything that is read. Now, your mind is going to stray. You're going to think about other things, but just keep coming back to what you're focusing on that day. And it's amazing how much that will start to quiet your thoughts. We hate not knowing. We hate the fact that our partners had this entire other life that they were living and that we don't know anything about it. And so we feel like we need to know. We feel like we deserve to know. And yet knowing often doesn't bring us any peace. Figure out what information you really do need to have and do what you need to try to get that information. Recognize what gaps your mind is obsessing over and do what you can to fill those in by just creating a narrative that fills that space neatly. And then finally, recognize the limitations that any of these details have. And give yourself permission to let those details go.